The Absolute at Large by Karel Čapek. Translated by David Wyllie. Performed by Francis Bass. Chapter 10. The Blessed Elen. Some days after these events, G.H. Bondy was wandering round the streets of Prague, a cigar between his teeth, and thinking. Anyone who saw him would have supposed he was looking at the pavement, but Mr. Bondy was looking into the future. Mark was right, he told himself, and that Bishop Linda was even more right. It simply wasn't possible to bring God to earth without enormous consequences, whatever anyone does, whatever they think. And this will have serious effects on the banking system. The devil knows what effect that might have on industry. There was another religious strike at one of the major banks today. We installed a carburator, and 2 days later the workers declared that all the bank's funds belonged to the poor. That would never have happened in Price's day. No, that would certainly never have happened. Bondy drew anxiously on his cigar. So what, he asked himself, are we supposed to do about all this? Today, orders reached 23 million. We can't stop it now. It's going to lead to the end of the world or something. In a couple of years, everything will be in a terrible mess. There are a few thousand carburetors operating round the world now, and each one of them is chucking out the Absolute day and night. And the intelligence of this Absolute is amazing. The way it always wants to do work is insane. Well, it's had nothing to do, I suppose. It was idle for thousands of years, and now we've let it off its chain. Like what it did at the bank. Does the book all by itself, does the accounts, deals with the correspondence, gives orders in writing to the management, writes fiery letters to the contractors about the workings of love. So now the bank's shares aren't worth the paper they're written on. 1,000 for a piece of smelly cheese. That's what happens when you let God get involved in banking. There's a textiles factory that keeps bombarding us with desperate messages. A month ago they replaced their boiler with a carburator. All right, the machine's running well, but all of a sudden the spinning machines and looms start working by themselves. If a thread breaks, it mends itself, and the machine carries on. The workers just look on with their hands in their pockets. Work is supposed to end at 6 o'clock, and the spinners and weavers go home, but the looms continue to run all by themselves, all night, all day, 3 weeks so far. They just weave and weave and weave without ever stopping. The firm writes to us, "For God's sake, take our products, send more materials, stop the machines." Now the same things happen to Buxbaum's, Morowitz, and other companies. They've been infected at a distance. They've got no more materials on site. In panic, they're chucking rags and straws and mud and anything else they can get hold of into the spinning machine. And now, believe it or not, the machines are weaving kilometers of toweling and calico and anything else you can think of, even out of this. It's causing a hell of a row. Textile prices have collapsed, England has raised import duties, neighboring states have threatened to boycott, and the factories are complaining, "For God's sake, please just take our products. Take them anywhere, send people here, wagons, trains, stop the machines." And then they sue you for loss of profits. Damn it! And reports like this come in from everywhere where we've installed carburetors. The Absolute wants work. It has a lust for life. In the beginning it made the world, now it's thrown itself into manufacturing. It's taken over cities and factories all over the country, cotton works, sawmills, sugar refineries, breweries. Even Škoda's under threat. It's working the uranium mines. In some places they're making workers redundant. In others they're locking the doors of the factories, saying they'll let them run behind locked doors. Overproduction is crazy. Any factory that doesn't have the Absolute is closing down. It's a revolution. And I, Mr. Bondy said to himself, I'm a patriot. I can't see our homeland fall to ruin, if only because this is where our own factories are. Right then, no more orders accepted for Czechoslovakia. What's done is done, but from now on there will be no more carburetors installed in Czech lands. Not one. We can flood the French and Germans with them, and then we can bombard England with them. England is conservative. They keep our carburetors out. We'll have to drop them on England from airplanes like great big bombs. We can infect the whole industrial and financial world with God and just leave ourselves as an island of honest labor, free of the effects of God. It's our patriotic duty, if I can put it like that, and what's more, it affects our own factories. G.H. Bondy's mood was lifted by this prospect. We will at least buy time to invent some kind of mask to protect us from the Absolute. Devil take it, I'll set aside 3 million for research into protection from God. 2 million, let's say, for the time being. Everyone in Czechland will walk about with masks on their face, and everyone else, meantime everyone else can drown in God. It'll destroy their industry if nothing else. It seemed to Mr. Bondy that everything was looking brighter. He noticed a young woman walking in front of him. Her movements were fluid and rather pleasing. I wonder what she looks like from the front. Mr. Bondy quickened his step, overtook her, and suddenly turned in a respectful curve, but he clearly thought immediately better of it and turned on his heel so quickly that he nearly hit her on the nose. Ellen, it's you, he sputtered. I had no idea you... I knew you were behind me, said the girl, with her eyes lowered as she stopped. You already knew it? Said Bondy, pleased at the news. I was just thinking about you. I could feel your animal desire, said Ellen quietly. My what? Your animal desire? You didn't know who I was. You were merely groping at me with your eyes, as if I'd been for sale. G.H. Bondy became serious. Ellen, why do you want to insult me? Ellen shook her head. They all do it. All of them. They're all the same. It's so rare to find someone whose eyes are pure. Mr. Bondy pursed his lips as if to whistle. Ah, here we go, old McCott's religious community. Yes, Ellen answered his thought. You should come and join us. Oh, yes, of course I should, Mr. Bondy declared, and as he did so he thought what a pity it was, such a nice girl. Why is it a pity? Asked Ellen gently. Ellen, listen, Bondy protested. You're reading my thoughts. That's not fair. If people could read each other's thoughts, they couldn't be polite to each other. This is indiscreet of you to know what I'm thinking. What am I supposed to do, then? Asked Ellen. Everyone who knows God has this gift. Each of your thoughts is thought by me at the same time. I'm not reading them, I'm having them myself. If you only knew how it cleanses you, if you can judge every hidden depravity. Mr. Bondy retorted, shaking with the effort not to think anything. Of course it does, Ellen assured him. With the help of God it cured me of the love of money. I'd be very glad if you were helped too. God forbid, said G.H. Bondy in some alarm. But tell me, do you understand everything that you see in people in this way? Yes, perfectly. Ellen, listen, said Bondy. I can tell you everything. You'd read it in my thoughts anyway. I could never marry a woman who could read my thoughts. She could be as holy as she likes. She could give as much charity to the poor as she likes. I earn enough for that, and it gives a good impression. I could even stand her being virtuous, Ellen, if only because I love you so much. I could stand anything. I loved you in my way, Ellen. I'm telling you this because you can read it anyway. Ellen, business is impossible without private thoughts. Society couldn't function. And above all, marriage couldn't function without private thoughts. Ellen, it's out of the question, and if you ever find a man who's the holiest man in the world, don't marry him if you can read his thoughts. A little deceit here and there is the only thing you can depend on to hold two people together. Ellen, holy Ellen, never get married. Why not? Holy Ellen asked sweetly. Our God has nothing against nature. He only sanctifies it. He doesn't ask us to have no feelings. He tells us to go forth and be fruitful. He wants us to... Mr. Bondy interrupted her. This God of yours doesn't understand. If he stops us deceiving one another, he's going against nature. It's simply impossible, Ellen, simply impossible. If he's an understanding God, he'll see that for himself. If he's not going to remain naive forever, he'll remain evil and destructive forever. I'm sorry, Ellen, I've got nothing against religion, but this God doesn't know what he should be wanting. Go and live in the desert, Ellen. Go there and take your clairvoyance with you. Something like that doesn't belong among people. Goodbye, Holy Ellen. I think it's best if we never see each other again. Chapter 11. The First Conflict. Nobody has ever found out how it happened, but just when the factory owned by R. Marek, 1651 Miksova Street, Brzevnov, was occupied by detectives and surrounded by police, Marek's prototype carburator was stolen. Despite vigorous investigations, the device disappeared without a trace. A little while later, Jan Binder, the owner of a fairground roundabout, bought a petrol engine from a scrap metal dealer. The dealer offered him a big copper cylinder with regulator and told him it was a very good value for the price. It would only need a small amount of fuel, he said, and it would keep running for months. Jan Binder felt a peculiar, even blind faith in the copper cylinder and bought it for 300 korun. He took it personally to his roundabout, which at that time had broken down. Jan Binder took off his coat, assembled the copper cylinder and, quietly whistling to himself, set to work. He replaced the regulator with a drive wheel, put a belt around it leading to another shaft which, at one end, would drive the music player and, at the other, make the roundabout turn. Then he oiled the connection pins, inserted them into one of the wheels, and, his hands in his pockets and pursing his lips to whistle, stood there in his stripy t-shirt wondering what to do next. The wheel span round 3 times and stopped. Then it juddered, rocked, and then, slowly at first, it began to turn in earnest. The music box started up with all its drums and whistles, the carousel shook itself as if waking from a long sleep, all its joints creaked and, with a sure and steady elegance, it began to rotate. The silver tassels jingled, the white horses with their gaily colored reins and saddles seemed to be drawing kings and princes in their coaches. A stag with wild and staring eyes twisted round, ready to leap. A swan with her elegant neck drew her pure white boat round the circle. All was a glitter, all jingled with music and all the glory of paradise as the carousel went round the music box at its center, watched by the unmoving eyes of the three graces painted on it. Jan Binder, his lips still pursed, stood there with his hands in his pockets and watched the carousel as it went round. There was something new and beautiful about it, and he stood as if in a dream. He was no longer alone. A tearful, runny-nosed child had dragged its young nanny along and stopped in amazement in front of the carousel, its eyes boggling and its mouth wide open. Even the young nanny stared and stood there as if seeing an apparition. The carousel turned. Its motion was oddly vigorous, grand, celebratory. One moment it spanned as if in a passion, the next it swaying like a cradle or a boat laden with all the aromas of India, the next moment it glided like a golden cloud high up in the sky. It seemed to be lifted high above the ground, to be afire, to be singing. No, it was the music box that was singing. Now, with a clear woman's voice, the tones of the harp falling on it like a silver rain. Then it roared like a jungle or an organ, but from the depths of the jungle were the flute-like tones of the birds that seemed to come and settle on your shoulder. The golden bugles sang with the tones of victory, or perhaps an entire army with its fiery swords a-glitter. And who was it singing this triumphant anthem? Thousands of branches waved, the heavens were open, and, to the rattle of drums, flew down the song of God himself. Jan Binder raised his hand, the carousel stopped, and leant down to welcome the child on board. He stepped clumsily on board as if walking into the open gates of paradise, and the nurse, as if in a dream, followed him and settled into the boat of the Swan. "No charge today," said Binder in his gravelly voice. The music box sang out and the carousel began to turn, as if lifting itself to heaven. Jan Binder felt dizzy. What's happening? It's not the roundabout turning, it's the whole world turning around it. The church in Zlikov is describing an enormous circle. The sanatorium is moving with the whole of Vyšehrad and spinning over to the other side of the river. Yes, the whole world is spinning round the carousel, turning faster and faster, spinning like a turbine. But the roundabout stands firmly in the middle, gently swaying like a ship, with white horses strolling about the deck, deer and swans, and the little child who takes his nanny by the hand and leads her to smooth the animals. Yes, the world is spinning wildly. The roundabout alone is a beautiful island of peace and calm. Jan Binder staggered, his stomach unsettled from the spinning of the world, opened his arms wide and ran to the carousel, where he caught one of the bars and leapt on board, onto the deck where there was peace. From his position on the carousel he could see how the world was turning and tossing like an angry sea. And look over there, startled people were running from their houses, waving their hands, staggering and falling, as if an enormous spindle had taken control of them. Binder, keeping firm hold of the bar, leant forward and shouted to them, "This way! Come this way!" The people saw the carousel as it sparkled and lifted itself above the dizzying rush of the world, and staggered their way towards it. Binder, one hand firmly holding the bar, offered the other hand out to them, and pulled them up from the ever-moving ground. Children, old women, old men, all now stood on the deck of the roundabout and caught their breath back after such surprise and amazement when they saw the world turning round. Binder pulled all the people on board, but there was still a little black dog, squealing with fear and the wish to be on the roundabout, but the earth carried him faster and faster all around it. Binder squatted down, reached out, and caught the dog by the collar to lift him on board. The music box now began to play an anthem of thanksgiving. It was as if the people on the roundabout were stranded on an island, the music like a chorale of castaways in which the rough voices of the swimmers blended with those of children at prayer. The storm that landed them there also created a rainbow, which itself sang a melody, in B minor, as the sky poured forth with glittering pizzicato from the strings of the heavens. The castaways on Binder's carousel stood bare-headed and in silence. The women whispered quiet prayers, and the children, forgetting what horrors they had gone through before, bravely stroked the solid jaws of the stag and the curving neck of the swan. The white horses patiently allowed the children to kick and scratch them as they clawed their way into the saddles. Some of them whinnied or calmly struck at the ground with their hooves. The world around them began to spin less wildly, and although he was not an experienced speaker, Jan Binder, looking tall in his stripy, sleeveless t-shirt, began to say something. "Well, everyone, we've all come here out of the turmoil and disorder of the world. We've found the peace of God here in the middle of the storm. The Lord has laid us down here to rest. This is a sign that we have to get away from the rush and bustle of the world, and turn to the lap of God. Amen." Jan Binder continued to speak in this way, and the people on the carousel listened to him as if they had been in church. Finally, the world stopped turning, the music box played a quiet and holy anthem, and everyone jumped off. Jan Binder told them once again that the ride had been free, and they left feeling that they had been elevated. Then, at 4 o'clock, when old people and mothers with their children were out walking, the music box started up again, and the world began to turn. Once again Jan Binder rescued them all and soothed them with an appropriate sermon on his roundabout. At 6 o'clock the workers were coming home from work. At 8 lovers came out walking. And again, at 10 o'clock, merrymakers came out of the pubs and cinemas. Each group after the other was caught unawares when the world began to spin, and was rescued by Jan Binder, who took them onto the blissful deck of his roundabout and sent them on their way again with his words to stay with them for the rest of their lives. After a week of saving people in this way, Binder's roundabout moved on and started to travel to new places up the river Vltava. It had been performing its spiritual work with great success for 4 days in the town of Štěkovice when something rather somber happened. Jan Binder had just finished his sermon and sent his new converts on their way with a blessing. Then a dark and silent crowd approached. At his head was a tall, bearded man who came straight up to Binder. "Well," he said with some effort to control his anger, "are you going to pack it in, then, or—" Binder's converts heard this, turned round, and came back to their teacher. Binder felt that his own people were close behind him, and declared firmly, "When the time comes." "Calm down," said another angry man. "It's Mr. Kazinda you're talking to." "You leave him alone, Mr. Hudetz," the bearded man said. "I can deal with him myself. For the second time, if you don't pack it in now, then, in the name of the Lord, I'll smash your head in." "And you," said Jan Binder, "you get off home, or else, in the name of the Lord, I'll knock your teeth out." "Bloody hell!" exclaimed Breek, the mechanic, as he pushed himself forward. "Just let him try." "Brothers," said Kazinda gently, "first let's try to settle this amicably. Binder, what you're doing here is a disgrace. It's just magic, and we're not going to tolerate something like that this close to our holy dredger." "Your dredger is a con trick," asserted Binder. "What did you say?" exclaimed Kazinda, insulted. "A con trick." It's hard to separate out the events that followed next. It seems that the first blow was struck by the baker, who was on Kazinda's side, but Binder smashed his fist into his head. The gamekeeper thumped Binder in the chest with the butt of his gun, but dropped the gun in the process. A young man from Štěkovice, on Binder's side, used it to knock out Breek's front teeth, and knocked off Mr. Hudetz's hat. The postman, Kazinda's side, throttled a lad on Binder's side. Binder ran to help him, but a girl from Štěkovice jumped on his back and bit his upper arm, right where Binder had his tattoo of the heraldic Czech lion. Someone on Binder's side pulled out a knife. The people on Kazinda's side seemed to draw back, but a few of them leapt on the roundabout, knocked off the stag's antlers and the elegant neck of one of the swans. The roundabout gave a sigh, it leant to one side, and its roof fell down onto the mob as they struggled with each other. Kazinda was injured as one of the bars hit him and lost consciousness. Everything seemed to be dark and silent. By the time help finally arrived, Binder had a broken collarbone, Kazinda lay half-conscious, Breek was spitting blood in some of his teeth, and the girl from Štěkovice was sobbing hysterically. Everyone else had fled. This recording is under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike license. Music was composed by John Philip Sousa and performed by the United States Marine Band. The book was written by Karel Čapek, translated by David Wyllie, and performed by Francis Bass.